If you're a newer player or new to the format, Commander is a great way to play with friends. The complexity of the format can sometimes be daunting given the sheer number of cards that are legal in the format. But in this video series, I hope to give you a few tips to improve your ability to play Commander and Magic in general. Everything in this video should be taken with a grain of salt. There will be exceptions, and I'm just one guy, so it's very possible that I'll make a mistake or not include a relevant edge case. And like our friend Obi-Wan Pleasant Kenobi says, only a Sith deals in absolutes. Hello, I'm Matt, and today we're going to be looking at a part of Magic in a bit of detail with the goal of making you a better Magic player. If you have any questions, just leave us a comment and I'll do my best to answer anything that is asked. Alternatively, feel free to reach out to a judge, they're super helpful. Death and other alternatives. Magic is an extremely literal game with respect to its syntax. It's important to understand this when it comes to playing the game. Understanding the templating and the syntax of the card can help you break down how the card is useful and how you can use it. You're not going to be able to instantly do this perfectly with just a few tips, but understanding the breakdown of a card will help you solve the puzzle before you cast it for the first time. There are exceptions to everything, so please make sure that you share them in the comments when what I've explained is incorrect. But what do I mean by syntax and templating? Well, descriptions of processes are very intentional in Magic. If a card says draw a card, that is a different action to taking the top card of your library and putting it into your hand. It may seem nitpicky, but it's important to appreciate the specifics as they're very relevant. There are some cards in the game which prevent you from drawing extra cards, but that doesn't mean you can't put extra cards into your hand, or move cards from Exile to your hand, a whole range of other ways that you might possibly get more cards. As such, we must be specific. It's worth mentioning at this time that we'll be referring to what's called the oracle text, which is the specific and current wording of the card and not necessarily the text which is printed on the card. This is especially relevant to understand with very old cards which might have functioned differently in the past. You may have heard the term errata being thrown around. This just means the changing from the card as it was printed to how it reads in the oracle text. You can find the oracle text on both Gatherer and on Scryfall. I'll have links for both of these in the description. In this video, we will be exploring death, dying, exile, and all things in between. Dies and died are descriptive terms on Magic cards that refer to when a creature or planeswalker goes to the graveyard from the battlefield. This can be caused by damage, destruction, and other effects, and it's often referred to by triggered abilities. Creatures die if they take lethal damage, if they get destroyed, or any other effect or spell that makes them go from the battlefield to the graveyard. Only creatures and planeswalkers can die. If another permanent goes to the graveyard, it doesn't die. If a creature or a planeswalker dies, it is also left to the battlefield, because it's not there anymore. If we look at the second line of text in this card, Abzan Ascendancy, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So this means if a creature is destroyed, or a creature is sacrificed, or takes lethal damage, you will create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying each time they enter the graveyard. It's important to note that if a replacement effect prevents that creature from going into the graveyard from the battlefield, such as Leyline of the Void, that creature won't die and it will be instead exiled. This will mean that you will not get the effect. Destroy is a keyword action, like trample or haste, which instructs a player to move a permanent from the battlefield to the graveyard. If it was a creature or a planeswalker that was destroyed, then it would die, and it also leaves the battlefield, unless it has indestructible, which is a keyword which prevents this. So if you were to destroy a creature, it would then die. It would move to the graveyard, and it would trigger a card like Abzan Ascendancy, provided that there wasn't a replacement effect. As a card like Eliminate says destroy target creature, it will then satisfy all of the needs for Abzan Ascendancy to trigger. Sacrifice, often shortened to sack, is a keyword action. It means to move a permanent you control to its owner's graveyard. If you sack a creature, it dies. It also leaves the battlefield. An indestructible creature can be sacrificed, which seems weird, but if you imagine it more to be visceral, an eliminate spell is being cast on a creature, destroying the creature, whereas a sacrifice spell, like Diabolic Edict, is cast on the player, compelling them to sacrifice the creature themselves. This is probably more flavorful in the way it helped me understand it than being connected to the rules specifically. So if we consider our Abzan Ascendancy example like we did before, if a creature that we have is sacrificed, we will in fact trigger the Abzan Ascendancy. Exile is a game zone the same way the graveyard is a game zone. It's also a keyword action, meaning put into the exile zone. If a creature is exiled, it doesn't die. It does, however, leave the battlefield. An indestructible creature can be exiled because guess what? It doesn't die. Indestructible only stops destroy effects, and this is not what's happening. It just goes on a trip somewhere that's not here. Some people believe that the Exile zone is actually just Colorado, which makes it very tricky to interpret the rules at a comp REL there. So if an opponent casts Swords to Plowshares on one of our creatures, it won't trigger our Abzan Ascendancy, because our creature did not die, it was exiled instead. You're doing a great job if you've stayed with us so far. It's going to get a little bit weirder now. We're going to be looking at some more complicated examples, but bear with us. It'll hopefully make sense by the end of the video. Leaving the battlefield refers to exactly what you think. It's no longer on the battlefield. It describes a permanent moving zones. If a permanent moves to any other zone other than the battlefield, it's left the battlefield. So if you exile, or sacrifice, or destroy, or return the card to its owner's hand, it has left the battlefield. The only exception is phasing. If a creature is phased, it doesn't leave the battlefield, but we're not covering that rubbish in this video. So if your Slowgurk has been eliminated, or Swords to Plowshared, or Cyclonic Rift, if any of these have been cast on it, you can check to see if the leave the battlefield trigger will resolve. Eliminate puts it in the graveyard, which is another game zone, so the trigger will resolve. Swords puts it into exile. It has left the battlefield, and so it will resolve. And Cyclonic Rift puts it back into your hand. So of course, it has left the battlefield and will resolve again. All of these instances have Slowgurk change zones and leave the battlefield. So each way, the leaves the battlefield ability will trigger. If Slowgurk has a Darksteel mutation cast on it, it won't leave the battlefield. It'll just stay there as a really poopy, indestructible blocker with no other abilities. This would be a good time to activate their ability, if we can do so, to return them back to hand before the Darksteel mutation resolves. Our last example here is a bit of a doozy, Sir Conrad. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. So we've only really covered the first condition so far, but we can apply the same logic to the second and the third conditions. So we've got if a creature dies, if a creature is put into the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or if a creature leaves the graveyard. So Sir Conrad doesn't as much care about what happens to creatures on the battlefield, but rather what is happening to creatures moving in and out of your graveyard. For the first condition, we can see that destroying or dealing lethal damage to a creature will cause Sir Conrad to ping your opponents for 1 per creature which is destroyed. Same with if we have our opponent sacrifice a creature, or if we sacrifice a creature ourselves, then it will trigger the condition. If we exile or bounce the creature to hand, it will not trigger those conditions, as those don't count as the creature dying and nothing is going to the graveyard. It's worth noting that if 1 or more creatures die at the same time as Sir Conrad, they'll all trigger as Sir Conrad sees all of them dying at the same time. For the second condition, the creature is put into the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield. So we could have abilities such as Mill, which puts cards from your library into the graveyard. We could have a spell like Thoughtseize, which puts a card from a hand into the graveyard via discard. We also have cards like Wasteland Strangler, which actually puts creatures into the graveyard from exile. For the third condition, if a creature leaves the graveyard, we could have a creature move to exile from the graveyard with Bajuka Bob. We could have a creature move from hand to graveyard with Eternal Witness, or we could have a creature move to the battlefield from the graveyard with a card like Reanimate. So hopefully these examples will give you a good, breadth of ideas to think about when it comes to all of your dying and exile and death triggers, and all of the different ways that can actually eventuate. It's really quite challenging when you first start to appreciate the difference between some of these things. You know, I can definitely appreciate it. I've only been playing Magic a few years myself, so I very, very well remember just how difficult it is to, work out what cards mean and how they actually function with each other. And you can be certain, sleeving up a deck, I know exactly what this card's going to do and how it's going to work. And then someone will basically be raining on your parade and telling you, this is not how it's going to work. But it's all just part of the game. But basically looking through videos like this and sort of really taking the time to understand, the specifics of each of these cards is going to be really helpful in you moving forward and understanding all of the intricacies of specific commanders, particularly if you're wanting to play a graveyard synergizing deck or a death trigger specific deck like an aristocrat or something like that. That's really all we have today. I really hope you get a bit out of the video, and if you're a newer player or you know newer players and you feel like that this is going to help them, feel free to send them on to this video. Thanks so much for checking out the video today. My name is Matt and this is Scoop and Response, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.